Welcome, this is Doc Marty, and our program is called Mental Wellness. We bring it to you every week. Our live broadcast goes out Monday morning, and then we replay it on Wednesdays at noon and on Saturdays at noon and at 9 o'clock in the evening. And the purpose of the program is to really provide information as well as different thoughts and different ideas, as well as some very practical solutions on how people can manage their lives better and to maintain inner control over feelings and thoughts and balancing out the mind, the body, and the spirit in a way that produces positive results. We come to you by way of RadioKair, which is located in Humble, Texas. And the program that we try to present every week is one intended to inform people about options, inform people about different ideas, as well as to promote a wellness concept. So we get away from the stereotyping of people having mental problems and being diagnosed as being ill, when in fact what we're really trying to do is to find ways of learning how to live better, how to improve our relationships, how to function better in society, how to maintain ourselves in career development, and how to provide an understanding that we are all here together, and our responsibility of being together really encompasses a whole lot of inner growth and a lot of inner responsibility, as opposed to some of the external forces that really get in the way of who we are and what we represent to the rest of the world. So the introductory part of this program is really created in such a way that we want to open it up. I encourage the messaging to come through right now through emails. We're still working on getting our phone system set up so we can actually take calls live, which I'm really wanting to be able to experience with our listeners. So we're restricting it now just the emails, of which I do receive several, and the time we'll devote to responding to those I think is very important, as well as to the content of the show. And the way to reach out to me by email is through docmarty, DOCMARTY 61 at gmail.com. Again, docmarty, MARTY 61 at gmail.com. So we're going to present some information today that deals with the issue of clinical hypnosis. It is a growing awareness that more people in this country are beginning to embrace. And as we get away from a lot of the mythology about what hypnosis actually is, and actually taking a look at what it can be, we're starting to find some very, very positive applications to it in both the medical world, as well as in social interactions, as well as being able to release out stress and tension, worry, fear, and helping people change habits. It is amazing, absolutely amazing, how a lot of people may have a real kind of almost primitive understanding of what we're dealing with, and yet the understanding of how to apply inner awareness, which is how we open up the unconscious part of our mind, becomes this mystery that we seem to not quite understand, and yet the process is extraordinarily easy because we are often in that part of our mind when we're daydreaming, or when we're looking at a picture or a show or a movie or reading a very captivating book, and we almost become totally oblivious to whatever else is going on around us without understanding that we're creating this internal state, what we refer to as a trance, meaning that the unconscious mind has kind of taken over our awareness, and all of our sensory perception, what we hear and see, taste, touch, and smell, is being routed through the unconscious part of the mind rather than the active process of bringing that information into our consciousness. So we understand that in a state of that altered awareness, it's not really a hypnosis state as much as it is an altered state of consciousness. Hypnosis becomes the mechanism or the tool that we use to open that part of the mind up. And in that part of the mind, what we access is intuition, imagination, creativity. It gives us full reach to our entire memory, not just the selective part that we occasionally come into, as well as understanding our feelings much better, because we have an understanding of what those feelings represent, what they don't represent, and how they're applied to us. So in that state, we become extraordinarily open to understanding new things, as well as understanding some old things that have troubled us or bothered us or traumatized us. So we are allowing a healing base to come into play. And the healing base is representing a flow of energy, which is what our body and our minds are running off of. And the energy comes from the food that we eat, it comes from the air that we breathe, as well as our inner state of understanding, how we connect to everybody else around us. Many, many years ago, there was a noted psychiatrist by the name of Carl Jung who devoted much of his career into looking for the commonalities that all human beings represent, the symbols that we use. And he went back to looking at tribal practices in very primitive societies. He was looking at cave drawings from hundreds and thousands of years ago. And he was beginning to understand that there are common things that we all experience. We all understand the value of the sun. We all understand the value of parenting. We understand the value of maintaining civilizations and cultures, as well as the idea that we are all here together sharing common experience, and our commonalities are far greater than our dissimilarities. And what he did was to put together some basic concepts of how the conscious mind functions. And he created this concept called the collective unconsciousness, which represents all learning that we somehow take on, and it becomes multi-generational. And we have subsequently learned, way after Carl Jung wrote tons and tons of material about the topic, that our genes, our genetic makeup, actually contains memory cells. So it's not a big mystery any longer how it is that sometimes our mannerisms may be like that of our grandparents. And we'll get these comments from relatives that we see maybe once a year, and they'll say, that's just like Uncle Jack used to do that. And yet we have no understanding of it, and oftentimes if we're children, we're shocked and embarrassed about those similarities. We are now understanding that there's actually genetic material containing memory cells. It's bringing that stuff forward. So a lot of the learning that we take on, that we look at ourselves wondering, like, where did that come from? How did we learn that? How did we understand that? It's actually inside of us. It's part of what we create as we are becoming created genetically. So there's a base now for understanding that what Carl Jung was looking at way back when he was talking about philosophy and how religion was a critical component to that. Really, there's a factual science base for that knowledge base. And when we talk about people's vicarious learning, meaning that we take it on from somebody else, we see it often with children who will take on the trauma experiences of their parents and believe it's theirs. It's a fascinating subject to look at, even as heartbreaking as it can be when you're working with children who have these pronounced emotional experiences. And we're discovering it's not necessarily their experience, it is the experience of a parent that they are now aware of, that they had no basis for awareness before, and yet they're feeling it, they're experiencing it as if it is theirs. And we take that forward to understand that because we have that material, because we have that knowledge base within us, and we can access it, we then take it to the next step, which is how do we correct it? How do we release the trauma? How do we get rid of those kinds of experiences that prevent us from really being who we want to be? Because that emotional stuff, which we know when we experience trauma that creates fear, that creates anger and rage sometimes, it blocks us from learning. It blocks us from moving forward with our own development. It prevents us from experiencing the fullness to a new relationship. It may actually compromise our ability to stay focused, to become ethical, to become the kinds of people that we want to be. And we know we have to do something to get into that understanding so we can make some changes and help people move on with their lives, which is what a big part of what my career has been about, doing the mental health kind of stuff that I've done for over 30 years. And as we move more into this collective awareness, which was part of the old collective unconsciousness, what we're now discovering is that the mind is very capable of creating healing, it's very capable of accepting new direction, and it's capable of resolving things that in the past we had no way of understanding that we could actually change. I remember hearing when I was going through graduate school years and years ago that certain illnesses that were being diagnosed were permanent. That if you had this specific illness, whether it was a bipolar disorder, which we unfortunately used to refer to as manic depression, if you were in that category of diagnosis, it was a permanent thing. You would have it for the rest of your life, and if you stopped taking your medications, you'd go crazy, you could kill people, and it was a horrible fate. It was the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde kind of mentality. Or if you had schizophrenia and it were to develop at some level, either in childhood, adolescence, or adulthood, you were condemned to that diagnosis, again, for the rest of your life. We're learning that that may not necessarily be the case, and in fact, what the research is showing from the genetic research that Dr. Bruce Lipton has done over the last 20 years is that our DNA is flexible. It's malleable. It can actually be affected by other issues like emotion. So we understand that we can actually create change. And the idea of being locked into certain things or certain diagnoses or certain experiences is not necessarily the truth, because we see people correcting themselves out of those things. It's not necessarily the effect of miracles, although to some degree it probably is a bit of a miracle that we are actually progressing beyond that state of fixed expectation. And we're now moving into something else of what's possible. And as we open that up, we understand that throughout the history of mankind, when we open up that question of what's possible, we create the beginning of how to access information. And whether it's a Renaissance period that we experienced in Europe during the 1600s, whether it was the Industrial Revolution going on in the 17th and 18th century in Europe and the United States, whether it's the technology of computerization, which started happening in the 50s, and now we're experiencing just enormous technological advancement, we know that when the mind can open up to what's possible, we start wanting to find out. And it encourages enormous new understandings and new development. So that's where the idea of hypnosis fits. It's not a fear-mongering kind of issue. It's not about opening the mind up for some kind of possessive thing or satanic worship. There's no connection to that material whatsoever. That was part of the fear base that came out from the early days of movies, when Dr. Svengali, who was a real popular villain in the old silent movie days of the 1920s, would cast a spell over the lost heroine that was the victim. And you'd see the caption underneath the message, I've got you under my spell. And it was believed to be hypnosis, which is not at all what those people were experiencing or promoting, even though it was labeled that way because there was a lack of any understanding as to what it was. Well, what it was mind control and brainwashing, which are not part of hypnosis. And yet we have this understanding, total misunderstanding of what's possible here, because it's not about controlling others, it's about inner control of self. So as we move into that awareness, we want to be able to start looking at what can we do with this stuff? How do we present it in a way that people begin to realize that we can make incredible changes, positive changes in our lives and our relationships, and we want to be able to bring that into the modern awareness of how do we function better. So we're going to take a little break, and when we get back, we'll talk about how to contact me for more information and how to reach out, which I dearly love and really honor people when they do have the ability to reach out to me and actually take the time to do it. So we're going to take a little break, and when we come back, we will talk more about hypnosis and self-hypnosis. This is Doc Marty with Mental Wellness, and I welcome you back. The contact information to reach out to me, again by email, is docmarty61@gmail.com. If you want more information about the kind of work that I do, the practice that I run out in Kingwood, Texas, you can reach me at www.alliedmentalhealthtx.com. It's allied, A-L-L-I-E-D, mental, M-E-N-T-A-L, healthtx.com. And you'll see all kinds of interesting stuff. Hopefully you'll find it interesting. I do anyway. Of the different programs that we run, different kinds of therapy programs we do, as well as information about the different things that I do with teaching, because I'm also a teacher, as well as material that I write and the book that I published, and there's sign-up things if you want to take the coursework that I have, which is coming up, by the way. I'm going to be teaching my newest course in the certification to become a clinical hypnotherapist, and that'll be beginning the first week of April. So the registration opened up just recently for that. And if you want more information about it, just go to the website and get the information. If you want to talk to me about that and talk to me directly, which I love talking to people, by the way. It's what I do for a living. It's really, to me, talking to people, it feeds me. It gives me energy, and I love being able to help people understand things better for themselves. But the phone number to reach out to me is 281-812-3322. It has kind of a rhythmic pattern to it. It's not hard to forget, and yet it's very easy to remember. 281-812-3322. So that way you can communicate to me, you can reach out, and looking out the window and some guy just waving, which is kind of cool. I love that. So let me get to some questions that have come in, one specifically from John, which I appreciate. Wanting to know if there's any military applications for hypnosis. The answer is no. It's been tried. Our military has looked at it very extensively, and the use of hypnosis per se, unfortunately, because it doesn't have the effect of what the Manchurian Candidate, the movie that's been done twice now, would like to imply that it has. There's no indication that the mind can be distorted in such a way to only remember certain information, and after 25 years or 40 years, however long that might take, a cueing sentence by a telephone is going to result in somebody just reverting and moving into something they supposedly were taught or learned as a child. It's a great premise for sci-fi, but there's no basis in reality to support that stuff because the unconscious mind continues to develop over time, and the things that we tend to latch on to or remember are things that we do over time because we become creatures of habit. So a singular experience of this is what you're going to do when you get this certain phone call, and oh, by the way, it may be 20 years from now or 40 years from now, and your entire life is going to happen, and you'll have lots of experiences, lots of emotional things, lots of new relationships. But when you hear this phone call ring and you hear the message, you'll automatically revert to whatever it is you were taught. That the premise, like I said, is interesting, but it has no basis in fact, and it's not hypnosis. The things that are more likely to happen hypnotically is that in the context of getting rid of a habit, something like smoking, is that you're replacing that want or that belief that somehow smoking is a good thing for you or it helps you relax or whatever that you want to construe it to doing, becomes empowered because it works for you over time. And the reality of factual information becomes less and less relevant because even though when we know it creates health problems, we know it can kill you, we know you're spending a lot of money on a pack of cigarettes that 50 years ago cost 20 cents and now it's whatever it is, $6 and change plus tax. It's no longer an attractive issue, and yet people will still hang on to it. They'll still defend it as if somehow there's a need or a right to do it, regardless of what the information may be that's totally contrary to that. What we have is a belief that somehow what we're doing, because we can justify it and because it's worked for us, however we construe that meaning work actually is valued, that it's something that now we're being confronted with, and it's either a physician telling us, if you don't do this, you're going to get lung cancer, or you're already getting COPD or some other kind of illness, or your grandkids are yelling at you because you stink from the smell and they can't stand being around you, or whatever those things are, they're now confronting your belief system. The only way you're going to really let go of that belief system is by developing something within you that has a greater positive emotional experience that you begin to value. It's not about living longer, because that really is not a concrete thing that most people understand. It's not about how you want to adjust to your stress, because it's not about breathing out of a cigarette that really creates the stress release. It's the oxygen you're breathing in, which you can do very effectively without a cigarette. It has nothing to do with what we think about, because thinking and beliefs are not the same thing. They're actually contrary to each other, because the information we have that we think about usually gives us information that's contrary to what we believe. So what we have to be able to do is create within us a different belief that is more powerful than the one we hold on to. Once we establish that and we test it, we find it's valid for us, our confidence in doing it becomes more valuable, we'll let go of the old belief. One of the reasons why hypnosis can be so effective in helping people quit smoking, which we've established over the last 30, 40 years now, is that in an unconscious awareness of valuing yourself differently, you now have a very positive message of how you want to be, how you want to express yourself, how you want to live your life differently. And that positive valuing starts to take on a more important value within itself, and the positive energy that gets created allows the old message or the old belief to dissipate. It goes away. Sometimes it can happen within a matter of an hour. Sometimes it may take a couple of hours. Sometimes it may take 2 or 3 weeks. And yet we discover that when people develop this new belief about how they want to present themselves, how they want to feel inside, the old habit is gone. And most of the time, the vast majority of the time, it doesn't come back, because you have to be re-triggered into that old negative messaging for it to have any value to come back. So we understand that the mind can be presented new understanding, and as long as it's wanting to make that change, as long as it values what that new belief will be, we change. So the smoking disappears. And that's one of the reasons why it's so effective. Because in that state of mind, we can create an image of what it is we want to be, how it is we want to be, how we want to think, how we want to act, how we want to behave, how we want to bring in new information, how we want to value that new information. And that's what allows a new belief to develop, because most of the beliefs that we talked about previously in one of the previous programs that we did, the old beliefs, for the most part, aren't ours. We inherit them. We take them on. Because as little children, we're not being told what to believe. We're just around parents or around other people that we value, and we allow those perceptions and those opinions to become ours. And by not making that choice, because we don't know as little children that we're actually making the choice, we tend to take those on, we value them, we sometimes will defend them just as well as our parents did, without realizing they're not our beliefs. We've taken them on, so we claim them to be ours, but they weren't the result of our own exploration or our own look at how we see the world or how we interact with people. So what we're wanting to do by promoting the concept of hypnosis is really focusing on what's the value. How is it that you would like to be that's different than how you are? So when people come to us because there's something about them that they want to change, initially it could be the perception that it is a habit that they want to get rid of, because some habits can be pretty offensive or obnoxious, and they want to get rid of it. Sometimes it may be a value or an attitude, that they have this thing that they are wanting their lives to be like that doesn't get them where they want. So the attitude that somehow, living in the city or how they relate to other people is not the way they really want to experience, because they've had some bad experiences with it and it's not working, so they want to change that. Or perhaps they've experienced something that doesn't let them move forward. It could be the result of a breakup of a relationship, or it could be the grief work that people will do when they, somebody passes on that's important in their lives. More recently, we're becoming more and more sensitized to people who don't have children but who have pets. And those pets typically don't live as long as the adults do. And yet when we lose those folks, animals, animal people, fur babies, however we address them, it's almost like a human life that's being lost, and we grieve it. And we grieve it intensely. So we're paying more attention to that process of loss. And at some point, as you've gone through this grieving process, and you're now wanting to move forward from it, you may need some help because your mind is still locked into the grief. So you may want to get some professional help to do it. And keep in mind that throughout all of this changing process, quite often what ends up happening is that people will go to their physicians, their primary care docs, and unfortunately what ends up happening is they get diagnosed as being depressed. And yet grief, we know, is not depression. Grief is sadness that's a result of a loss. But we're dealing with professional folks in the medical world that don't necessarily understand the difference. Or we deal with people who worry a lot. Well, worrying by itself is not a mental illness. Anxiety certainly can be. And yet people are medicated for worrying that is not anxiety. And we continuously run into these situations where the intention of what's happening by going to get that professional help is good, and yet the materials by which it's evaluated and then treated results in something that doesn't present change. It just either presents dependency, like in the case of opiates when it comes to pain management, or it's presenting something that has a side effect to it, which can be far more dangerous physically than the original problem that the person was being helped for. So we've got to be real cautious about how we present ourselves to other people, because it's not safe to make the assumption that everybody understands what grief is, or everybody understands what worrying is about, or that people who want to make changes behaviorally necessarily have to medicate themselves in order to make those changes. So we're moving into a different arena now, which is allowing us to transform that negative experience or that negative thought into something that we become inner managing or self-caring about. And we can make these incredibly positive changes for ourselves. So we're looking at that. The issue, back to the question, one of the interesting applications of how people thought the military could be used, how the military could use hypnosis, was what happened to pilots that were taken as POWs during the Vietnam War. And we know from the release of the Kremlin information that Gorbachev put out after the fall of the wall in Berlin, was that the Soviets had taken 12 American pilots shot down over North Vietnam, sent them to Moscow to be brainwashed to find out whether or not they could divulge secrets. And what ended up happening to those 12 individuals is that basically they were killed, but not because of hypnosis, but because of torturing, which was used after the hypnosis failed, because none of the 12 apparently divulged any kind of secrets. And the Kremlin, in its infinite stupidity at the time, figured, well, we can't send them back to where they came from after what we've done to these people, so we're going to try to extract the information by using the old KGB ways, which was basically torture and mind control. Didn't work, and all 12 of them passed. The grave site that was found outside of Moscow was later opened up, and the remains were returned back to the United States, thank God. But that's one of the more recent attempts to try to use hypnosis as a form of brainwashing, which it cannot be done, simply because the brain is going to protect itself. Yet we know that the mind is a very powerful tool, and intuitively, our functioning is to maintain a balance within ourselves, which is how our intuition works. And when you try to violate that basic understanding of how the mind is, we're violating humanity. And within us, we're not going to allow that kind of message to happen. It can be manipulated. We know that things like the Jim Jones story, which was not hypnosis, that was another example of mind control, was used to promote an issue that was emotionally powerful and allowed people to make absolutely horrendous choices for themselves based on information that was false. But again, that was not a hypnotic process. That was strictly a mind control thing. And as we move forward, understanding more and more of what hypnosis can actually do for us, we're going to find incredible positive results. So for right now, we're going to wrap up the show. Again, I encourage people to send me messages, text messages through docmarty61@gmail.com. And I wish you all a very pleasant week, and we will talk to you next week.